Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sathology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means the study of science, Sathology means the science of truth, study of truth, and mythology means study of myth or study of fake lie imagination. Now, today we have a very, very interesting topic, and you are just about to see tomorrow another one on strategic insight. But today we are talking about how do we become a researcher, a muni. I call this guest, now you can imagine now whom I'm talking about. So muni means a person who does manan means meditates. Muni and rishi means person who actually follows it and practices it, experiments it and tests it out. Muni, rishi. So these are very good scientific terms to be used for researchers. Now nowadays researchers means like a person's doing research under the soil, all these different words everywhere, material research, spiritual research. But Muni and Rishi is a very much more advanced words to be used for researchers. But today we are going to go through the whole process. Plus, we'll discuss a little bit about Devta, because most of you have asked that question, and there is general misconception in the Sanatan Dharma about the violence and non-violence aspect. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Nilesh Nilkant Oak.
Namaskar, Aditya ji. And on the subject of researcher, so jokingly, I can say research. So many times they do the search, but there is a researching, and that means many times copy pasting, unfortunately. The word that is used in Sanskrit, but also Marathi, is Sanshodhak. And that actually has a better connotation, like right. Shodhak, in a sense, someone who is actually doing the investigation, right. And so in the sense of in a very methodical manner or focused manner or about something specific.
Yeah, Sanshodhan is very much lacking nowadays. And it comes to really good to the point, research. Something which has already been searched. So research becomes a good tool for making more money, right? Getting more projects sanctioned also. So billions of dollars. I was shocked. And there was a recent congressional hearing in which one of the senators was quoting, they spent $700,000 in understanding the ficus of insects. And so I'm just saying this is one research. And another research was, so these kind of researches are being funded. And where we are doing such an important work on researcher, if any US government employees is listening, then we are also doing research here about the ancient history for the whole world, not just for you and me. Yeah. So why not this kind of research be funded also? That is one question to them also. Yeah,
it's question to them. And I think on our side, there's some little bit of homework or a strategic play we need to do is to the advantages are already there, but how people can make money. See, America is about capitalism, as a foundation. So if we show how this can be used to make money, I think the players would jump in. Okay. So when they do the medicinal kind of research, the whole jugaad, honestly, just like changing. I worked with the pharmaceutical industry. It's like changing the bond or changing modifying a chemical compound with similar properties. And now it is patented and it becomes a new product. But if money can be made, that's how the capitalism works. There are some good aspects of it. In a way, the motivation is good if it can be combined with the dharma.
That's right.
So that dharma piece we can bring, that niti, the absolute moral code is what we can bring.
No, based on the comments, you just gave me an idea now. So we'll have to work on it. So that's how I get inspiration from conversations with people like you. Now, the another misconception nowadays is dharma makes us weak. And which is why people think that Hindus are the fodder for everybody else. And then, and I don't want to talk, but Israel as a small country has defended itself well because they have to do it. But Hindus, which are 1.1 billion or a little more, because I'm counting even those Hindus like Romanis and many other affiliated Hindus which are there, which world has unrecognized. And also in the US census of Pew Research, the uncategorized people, spiritual people, agnostic people, all those people, if you look at them, study closely, at some way or the other, they may have faith in nature. Again,
Hmm.
it comes to the dharma platform. So
Hmm.
for all those people, I'm saying that dharma is a strong concept. It makes you stronger. It makes you militarily stronger, policy wise stronger. Also, it also makes you a good human being. What is your view on that? A little bit we can discuss this.
Well, the Dhru, it comes from that is that stands, or in the sense of what is, Sat in the sense of what is. And so the dharma, the concept of dharma, now, right now, it's like you can say the Hinduism is cornered so much that it has come down to 1.2 billion and we have to designate I'm a Hindu. But in reality, dharma is in the sense of what is, what is something very natural. And in that sense, dharma will not distinguish based on the modern designations of religions or anything, even when the person may not want to accept it. The person, Jeffrey Armstrong, one of your other guests, he describes it beautifully. He says everyone is on a different train. Sometimes some people, they find it hard to get to understand what really is, because they have been brainwashed into a certain dogma. Okay, but their intention can be still very correct. They are doing it for a right reason, just happen to be on the wrong train or happen to be on a slower train. So he says, everyone is on the train, different trains, different times, and we can always assist them, saying, hey, this is the express if you want to be here. I mean, I'm not talking any specific one, but dharma simply means the natural. Like, it just, as Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, the Vedas are not to be understood only in the books, but it's literally to be understood from the nature, just by observing the nature. And
That's right.
Patanjali says the same thing in Yoga Sutra.
And most of the Devi Devta, they carry a
Hmm.
weapon, self-protection.
Hmm.
Self-protection is built into Sanatan Dharma.
Hmm.
It is according to Manu Smriti. Manu Smriti is a great book. Any mispropaganda against it is not acceptable. And I love Manu Smriti. And it doesn't create caste is a European word. Manu
Hmm.
Smriti doesn't create disunity. Manu Smriti creates a unity, creates Varnashram, a society which can be stable. Now, there have been far more discriminations in the medieval Europe and far more human rights violation in the medieval Europe. Devtas teach us how first we need to protect ourselves, our bodies, and before we can protect others.
Hmm.
So, like you were telling me that all the devtas carry a weapon. Now,
Yeah.
weapon is always for self-defense,
Right.
but it can be used for offense when the life is threatened.
Yeah, which is self-defense again, if you
It's
think
again
of it,
self-defense.
right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, and the emphasis of dharma is on a swadharma, swakarma, and therefore swasaurakshan also. Therefore, you have to protect yourself, and that's why it is to be done. And just you mentioned caste, and the caste is connected with India. The last place anyone should ever connect caste is India. So of course it came from Portuguese, the casta, but even in the whole Western Europe, that casta is essentially a class. So for example, you can say all the airlines are casteist.
Yes.
They have a first class, business class, and a common,
Correct.
regular economy class.
Correct.
In fact, if they truly mean in the sense of a dharma, what they might do is the person who needs, because of say age or disability, needs the most convenient place should be into the so-called first class or a business class, right? And do it accordingly. But no, here it is done on your ability to pay and so on and so forth. So it is casteist. If the rich person gets the first class, it is casteist.
Now, even the US Congress is casteist now because there are senior members, ranking members, and they're non-ranking members, and they're
Hmm.
freshmen. So they're all
Hmm.
casteist because they have a
Hmm.
caste system there, even in the US Congress.
Yeah, and in
Even
fact, or the think of a concept of left versus right. It came
right.
from France,
Correct.
where after the revolution and after the monarchy was removed, then the ordinary folks, what they consider ordinary, like farmers and everyone, could also come. But you know what? They've sat on one side, on the left
Yes.
side,
Yes.
and the royalties who were already using before, which is a very much a casteist concept, and
Right.
it is their concept. I mean,
Yes.
they're just forcing it on others, say a class. So leftists and rightists are were relevant done on simply the people who could afford a perfume, because both parties didn't take shower frequent enough. Okay. And the other party who could not afford perfume, they were the leftist. Think of it.
Self protection is definitely a dharmic concept. So, everyone, whether proactively or actively, protect yourself. That is more important. And today we'll now begin with the journey of a researcher. Very interesting topic, because most of you would like to know why Nileshok became Nileshok today, and how what was the journey from where they started. For me also, it's true. I belong to the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya. So without a parampara, I am nothing too, because we are reading and repeating. We are
Yeah.
not creating new knowledge. It's already given by Vyasdev, Valmiki. But
Yeah.
between those lines, we try to find something which is interesting for my understanding. Like, I love geographical marks, and therefore in my book I declared what is the river Chadoba. It's still called Sardyaj River, and I
Hmm.
declared that in my book.
Hmm.
And I proved it that yes, that's the exactly book, because there are bamboo trees over there, a lot of bamboo trees.
Yeah. Vetasa, right? What is the word?
Chaloba, Shadoba,
Yeah, yeah. And then the word for those bamboo trees is
Vetisi, yeah,
kichaka, kichaka,
Kichaka, Kichaka. That's right.
kichaka.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the way I remember it is the guy who was killed by Bhima in there. That's how I try to remember the word.
Yeah,
Yeah. We are standing on other people's shoulders, and that's what we do it. And the new things that we are expected to add is in the tradition of the dharma, which is
correct.
sanatano nityanutana,
That's
making it relevant for
Smriti.
our times and our circumstances.
Like we are creating
So,
Smriti also. Smriti, this is Smriti.
yeah,
Without divulging from Shruti, we are writing these books.
huh,
But you can always do cross reference.
right. In fact, we encourage that people do cross reference, even insist that they do cross referencing.
That's right.
Right. Do you want me to start sharing?
Yeah, yeah. And first of all, Nileji, I never found any contradiction between Ramayana and Mahabharata in the purpose.
Yes.
Sometimes some shloka maybe here and there with the word, but if you look in the larger context, there is no uh, like a they're not conflicting at all.
Absolutely correct. And see, the variation comes because of the deep antiquity. So what happens is, like, suppose even we have to we have to make a list of all the US presidents, right from George Washington. What can easily happen is we might miss some names, or sometimes we might miss the sequence. We might tell a wrong sequence, like somebody became president before somebody else. I mean, that can happen simply because of our memory, right? Krishna says matta smritir jnana apohanancha. He it is the God given remembrance. Also we forget things, and the way those minor details will be there, but as you said correctly, it's extremely consistent. I mean, how many people know that right during the war, of course, it's coded by Vyasa 18 years after the Mahabharata war, but right during the war, like say Ashwatthama is fighting with Dushasan or something like this. And in their discussion, in their brave discussions, angry discussions, in certain way, whatever they are, how they are teasing the other side, they're quoting from Ramayana. So the people in general were very much aware of Ramayana in Mahabharata times. To the extent, right during the war, they can quote something. So with that, I want to just start this, which is a small snippet of my research journey. And why am I discussing this? The idea is not to talk about myself, but through a medium that becomes entertaining, somewhat lighter, somewhat enlightening, somewhat educational, if not humorous, definitely entertaining, want to bring certain insights how actually a original research takes place. And the title I gave is Passing the Baton, so dating of Mahabharata Ramayana. Now, if you are listening to me in general on YouTube, if you have read my books, if you're reading my 500 plus blogs, following me in a social media, then you are in general aware of my work. If you are following Saptology, then now we have many between me and Aditya ji. Our conversations have gone into multiple episodes. So you are familiar with it. So it's not to take you into the details of the dating, but beyond this technical aspect, what are some of the things that go? What are the one, how one thing leads to another? And so I thought the title, very apt title, would be Passing the Baton. And between the two photographs that you are seeing, I'm confident you recognize my photograph on the right. On the left, who you see, he passed away 2 years ago, Dr. P.V. Vartak, Padmakar Vishnu Vartak. Was a medical doctor, lived in Pune, sort of a western part of India, and passed away 2 years ago. And he was about 86, 88-year-old, something like that. Now, he is my inspiration. He was my inspiration. Okay. Now, it's very important to understand, just because he's my inspiration doesn't mean I agree with everything he did. And that's very important point. That is the beauty of a Sanatan Vedic Dharma. That is the beauty of Dharma tradition. Okay. Dharma tradition, Dharma civilization, that you don't have to agree. A very few snippets of this, insights of it, we do find in the Western world. Now, in the modern day, we do find in the science, people will agree and disagree and all that. But in the old times, it was a taboo to disagree. I mean, you could be punished with a death and being burnt on a stake and put in the prison. And that was the whole story for the Europe. But if you go back further, we get just a very few snippets of that in the Greek civilization. Something very, very simple, such as when Thales said that, whatever our ancients has given us, we should critique it, to test it, to see if this is true. And that way we can derive the insights. Now, remember, you will just say, what's a big deal about it? We do that all the time. But in his time, that is about 2,500 years ago, it was considered a revolution to even question something that somebody has said it before. Okay, so just a great inspiration for me. And so I thought I'll just share some snippets, and through that you'll see how sometimes the thought process goes. Because when somebody explains what they have done in the research, they might not follow that path because it can be distracting and it might be confusing. But today, the objective is to see actually how the process of research might take place. So some of the things we will discuss is Swarthanuman versus Pararthanuman. Then, of course, a little bit about Dr. P.V. Vartak and myself. And I'll come to that. Now, what you see in the top, and if you cannot read Nagari script, then you will not able to read it. But Dr. P.V. Vartak wrote many books. I don't know the exact number, possibly around 30, maybe more. Most of his writing is in Marathi, which is the same mother tongue that I also share. Very close to Sanskrit, but that's not to say it's identical or anything. Now, the number of his books, almost all of his books have been translated in English. But of course, as you know, it's always totally fun, joy to read it in the original language it is written. I'm not asking you to learn Marathi, but the flavor and the excitement and the joy that one gets when one reads his book in the original in Marathi is nowhere comparable to their translations in English. Still, they try to get the best out of it, but all the humor, all the joy, all the sarcasm, all the satire, and a very, very unique style of writing that is only his, and it definitely comes out in his original writings in Marathi. Now, against that, so first book, since many of you will not able to read it, it's a book called Swayambhu, that is referring to the character of Bhima from the Mahabharata. And of course, in this work, he also shared his research on the dating. The second book is called Vastav Ramayana, like the Ramayana as is, so to say. He covers the whole Ramayana story in brief, but also the dating aspects and many other aspects related to culture, science, technology, civilization, and whatnot. In fact, if you can see on the second book, you can see that trident, which is that structure in the Paru that we have discussed many times on
Candelabra.
Candelabra with Andy, with Aditya ji, this is the structure in the Andes in Peru. And these are my books. Again, you are familiar with it. The word Swarthanuman and Pararthanuman is this. when you as an individual are researching in certain fashion, there is no decided path, because you may take certain
Nilesh, I have something coming in my mind
please.
before, because this is the right point. This poison pill is for
Hmm.
those people who are mythologists, people who do not
Yes.
have any faith, and therefore this word is very good. I love this word poison pill, because especially for those people who create fake narrations
Yes.
without understanding the timelines. Just want to add that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Or they will pretend that they are trying to find the timing of historical events,
Hmm.
but actually they are creating fakery. It is
Fake.
a it this these evidence of the Vasudev and evidence of Valmiki embedded in the Mahabharata Ramayana. Just again, we are taking as two as an example, acts like a poison pill against this fakery of those who are just in the garb of becoming, I mean, just they will use the excuse that they're dating it, but really their objective is very, very personal. They want to be popular, they want to make money. I mean, it could be different objectives. Sometimes it's just the hate, like, like the Nyaya Darshana says, it's not like even they want to come up with the dating of these epics, but they just somehow has developed a what you call distaste or hate or detestation for my work. I feel envious. I mean, it could be anything, all the shadripus, kama krodha lobha moha matsara, all of those, and it can come out of that. So again, so for such people, the very beautiful evidence that is been embedded by the likes of great rishis and maharshis like a Vyasa and Valmiki acts like a poison pill. So that's what that last title meant. The Bhishma Nirvana evidence acts like a poison pill. Why? Because that evidence shows, and you should pick up that book if this excites you, that Mahabharat war is only possible between 7000 BC to 5000 BC. So anyone who is claiming anything after 5000 BC, Aditya ji, that one acts as a poison pill. In that sense, it's not poison pill for everyone. In fact, Bhagavad Gita talks about it, right? Yatat agre vishamiva. When you are even working on the right track, truly trying to do original work, truly trying to solve the problem. Initially, your efforts, when you're doing it, it feels like a poison. यतद अग्रे विषयमेव परिणामे अमृतोपमम तत्सुखम सात्विकम प्रोक्तम आत्मबुद्धि प्रसादजम. But when you achieve that with your own pure original efforts, the outcome feels like amrut, ambrosia, and brings you full contentment. And that's what the tradition that I'm talking, the likes of Dr. P.V. Vartan. In fact, Aditya ji, I mean, I don't know when you heard the name first time. Majority, forget the West, but majority of the India is simply not aware of who Dr. P.V. Vartak is. Many of them have not even heard the name, and those who have heard the name, they don't know exactly what he did. And even without knowing his work, people will also try to put him in a negative light for no reason. And again, if they read the books, his books will also act like a poison pills for them, because they would have to swallow their words, the wrong words that they might have said about Dr. P.V. Vartak. The point I was saying, Aditya ji, was about Swarthanuman and Pararthanuman, which is to say, when we are researching something, we may not know exactly what we are going to find. Well, that's what is called original research. There is no agenda. We want the evidence to take us wherever it takes us, and we are willing to go along with the evidence, and essentially testing everything and piling up as what the majority of the evidence is taking you towards, and also noting down without throwing them what are some of the exceptions, so that they become the ingredients for future research. Now, once you identify something, once you make a wonderful discovery, get some deeper insights that no one have had before, that's why we call it original research. Now, how do you tell this? How do you communicate to people? That is the word called Pararthanuman. And then there are methods. Just like in science, we say, okay, here is my problem I was trying to solve. Here is the theory I proposed. Here is the evidence, therefore, I used. Here is how I objectively tested it. Here is the background knowledge I used. And here is how I drew the inferences. Here is the another evidence, and how it all fits very nicely like a jigsaw puzzle. That is the method of explaining. That's Pararthanuman. So there is that some difference, and then we may not go through the whole presentation. We'll see. Now, this one again, a good summary, one-page summary of my work. All of you are familiar with it, like where I showed Mahabharata war more than 7,500 years ago, Ramayana more than 14,000 years ago, and the Rigveda, or definitely the old portions of Rigveda, definitely more than 24,000 years ago. And while I started with astronomy, and hydrology, this particular timeline that you are seeing is been corroborated, supported, validated by super rich evidence, empirical, objectively testable, scientific evidence from multiple different disciplines of hard sciences: archaeology, oceanography, climatology, genetics, physical anthropology, just name it. If the evidence exists, if it can be connected with the descriptions of the either the epics or Rigveda, the evidence to this day has only supported this timeline. Sometimes the evidence may run into neutral territory, meaning, yeah, you tested it, but you cannot connect its relevance for the timeline, then it will not say anything. But it has to this day has not contradicted anything. Okay. So, and I'll just go fast through that. The problem these days I emphasize is that although the nonsense of Aryan invasion theory is gone, is destroyed, it's not gone from human psyche because we need to change the textbooks. But unfortunately, the majority of the researchers around the world and also in India, they are brainwashed. So they may even say Aryan invasion is wrong, which thank God, at least they understand now, although they may not understand the evidence. But the background against which this Aryan invasion theory was proposed as an agenda-driven propaganda, which is to say what? The Western Europe was thinking the whole Earth began in 4000 BC for a very long time. I mean, Einstein and Kepler also gave a seconding, they supported. They said, yeah, we also agree that the Earth began in 4000 BC. Now, I'm not saying this to criticize Kepler or Newton. The point is that the geographical science, as far as the modern science is concerned, is very recent. It's after Darwin, like 150, 200 years. And after that, which of course you find in the world civilizations around the world, whether you go to Mayan or Incas or India, they knew that the world, maybe just on a pure Shraddha, okay, pure based on a reverence, what the text were telling them, but they knew that this is going on for a very long time. And if you consider Indian civilization, these are the cycles that get repeated, the Kalpa and Manvantar and so on. But they couldn't show a proof that the West would understand. Now the West came up with their proof on their own to support what, for example, the Dharma traditions were saying, Dharma civilization was saying for thousands and thousands of years, which is a good story. The sad part is that many of the researchers working in Indology field, they even at an unconscious level, just like the movie Matrix, that you may try to tell everyone you are in the Matrix and they would not believe you. Similarly, they don't know why they think that way, but because of the brainwashing that has happened over the last 300 plus years, they are still stuck that nothing can happen. There can be no civilization before 10,000 years. This is in contradiction to abundant, super rich evidence that is available around the world, not just for Indian civilization. There is a Natufian civilization in Israel, like Adityaji, you mentioned Israel in a very different context. This was discovered in 1928, and the very sophisticated civilization, agriculture-based civilization, agriculture implements and everything. They were working with the grain, storage of grains, a settled civilization going back to 15,000 years. If you go to Japan, there is this Hamon culture or Hamon pottery. I mean, from the pottery, it's now into Hamon civilization. Very sophisticated civilization in Japan, going back to, again, more than 15,000 years. Once you start understanding, then understanding Ramayana in one of, if not the oldest civilization of the world, but at least one of the oldest civilization, Indian civilization, not a surprise. I mean, we have a lot of time. So in this context, Again, now if I started researching as a young lad, young high school student, now I wouldn't say I was researching. I was just trying to comprehend what other people have done and so on. And how do you comprehend? If you don't know anything, even to accept something, like how do we believe that Newton's law is correct or Newton was a great scientist? Do not be under the foolish notion that we truly understand why Newton was a great scientist. We truly don't. Most of it is purely based on our teacher that we liked told us so, and we accepted it, or maybe our parents told us so, we accepted it. Therefore we need shraddha. Now with the shraddha we also need a samshay, because if we don't have a samshay, there is no progress. If we just accept the thing as is and don't do anything about it, then there will be no progress. Even the way the plantation is done, say rice plantation. Now there is a Japanese way of doing plantation, right? And somebody thinks, well, we do this and we get lots of grains. Is there any other way we can do, which might be easy to do, which might gives us more yield and more efficient and so on and so forth, easy to do? And true, therefore we need some samshay. And then we need jidnyasa, curiosity. Can I try this and let's see what happens? And actually willingness to try and not just give a idle suggestion to someone else. That's why this balance is very important. Shraddha, samshaya, jidnyasa. And I have shown this before, so I'll go fast through it. What it does, these three elements act as a driving force for each individual to progress. One thing gives you karma shakti, that shraddha, therefore that makes you go through the hard task, like me reading Mahabharata or Bhagavad Gita or whatnot. Samshaya is what leads to the jnana trupti eventually, and phala prapti, the jidnyasa, is actually leads to the outcome. Because unless you put your effort, there is no point just asking somebody to do it and then hoping that it will happen. Hope is not a best strategy. Now, coming back to this transition and my inspiration, in Dr. Vartak. I don't know if now this, maybe I'm discussing Dr. Vartak in a detail for the first time. I don't know how many of you know that the 5561 BCE that I established, I validated as the year of Mahabharata war and established that there cannot be any other year that will qualify as the year of Mahabharata war based on the evidence of the Mahabharata text. But what you may not know is that some 50 years ago, 1970s, okay, Dr. P.V. Vartak had proposed 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharata war. He came from a very different perspective, and there's little bit I will discuss, not a whole lot. You would have to read my book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? Or even the historic Rama, and go to the chapter. There is one chapter in When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? It says Theory of Dr. P.V. Vartak, and it discusses his theory, discusses how different things he assumed and how did he try to corroborate that 5561 BC. In what way it is very ingenious, very creative, but also in what way it is very different from my theory and why it is different. But that's a different subject. I would encourage you to read my book. But the point is, he had already done this 50 years ago. And now some of you must be thinking, so Nilesh, tell me, what's the big deal? So he did something in 1970, and you come on the scene like 10 years ago, so 40 years after he had done this, and you say, oh, by the way, guys, I am asserting that the year of Mahabharata war is 5561 BC. What's the big deal? Well, I would like to give at least a snippet of that, what that big deal is, but also to tell you, share some of the aspects, just a few aspects of the greatness of Dr. P.V. Vartak. So here is Dr. P.V. Vartak, here is me. Before actually taking you to the exact evidence of Mahabharata itself, and today what we will do, Aditya ji, is we will just do Mahabharata, and I'll stop at that point. Because at least we do a good justice to this, and then it becomes a very smooth discussion for Ramayana. I mean, in principle, without going into the details of Ramayana dating of 12,209 BC, I can simply say ditto. Whatever I just guys discussed with Mahabharata, just repeat the word ditto. And as far as the methodology is concerned, it's a similar. There are some interesting things in Ramayana, so I would like to discuss them. We'll see how time works. Now, before actually taking you to the Ramayana dating or Mahabharata dating of Vartak or mine, This is how I started. So, for example, when I read the claim of Dr. P.V. Vartak, 5561 BC, remember, this is going back now 30 years. Of anything else in the world, and definitely in India, anything is claimed to be that old. And definitely no one is saying Mahabharata happened 7,500 years ago. Now, granted, before Vartak, even going back 100 and 125 years, there was another great astrologer, astronomer called Lele Shastri. And he had proposed a year which was in that bracket, 5228 BC. And another phenomenal astronomer, Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit. Just like I said, many people have not heard the name of Dr. P.V. Vartak. Many people have not heard the name of Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit. In fact, Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit wrote 2 books in Marathi originally. It's like Bharatiya Jyotish Shastracha Itihas, or History of Indian Astronomy, Volume 1 and Volume 2. Interestingly, when it was translated by someone from Western Europe, or could be American, I forgot now, that translator's name became famous. Nothing wrong with it, but almost like the original name, original writer is lost, to the extent that book, even if you go to the libraries here, those of you who are listening from the university system, most of you, do try this. Like, type the title of the book, History of Indian Astronomy, and volume 1 and volume 2. More than likely, immediately, you might see in some cases these days, you will not see the name S.B. Dikshit, okay, but you'll see the name of the translator, and it almost will give you the impression as if the translator is the one who wrote the book. Now, translator did a good job. I mean, not to take a credit away from him, but it is not his original book. The reason I'm mentioning this is, even when, with the exception, when you heard 5000 BC, my God, 7,000 years, because remember, because of the colonial influence on major part of the world, the whole world is stuck, was stuck, but even now, especially Indian researchers are definitely still stuck into this dogma of the whole thing beginning in 4004 BC. Therefore, they cannot go. If you tell them something was happening, a beautiful civilization was taking place in Egypt, or in Japan, or in Israel, or in India, like Ramayana happening, and before that Parshurama, they will hardly believe this. They will hardly even comprehend it, because of this brainwashing. So therefore, I wanted to always start with here, and that's what I wanted to disillusion myself, take out of that brainwashing, that what I have learned through the textbook. That I was taught, like, and I'm sure most of you think the same way, agriculture became, agriculture started in the Levant, which is like Iraq and Turkey and that area, and then it spread around the world. There was agriculture there. It's not at all correct. There is no factual evidence to say that it started there. It did happen there. It did not start there. Very fertile land there, especially the Iraq. So therefore, I like to start with archaeology, agriculture. If we just look at agriculture, there is a independent starting points of agriculture all around the world. If you go to Peru, Incas and Ayamaras, do you know what you'll find? A agriculture revolution. They had 400 different types of potatoes, and depending on the altitude, we are talking Peruvian landscapes, terrace farming kind of thing. Depending on the altitude, they knew which type of crops, which type of potatoes to plant at a certain altitude, and so on. Very fascinating things, aqueducts and so on and so forth, different ways of getting the water there. Rome, of course, India, very, very old agriculture. I just mentioned the Natufian culture in Israel. Now it's a desert, and of course, Israel transformed this beautifully. But before that, going back 12,000, 14,000, 15,000 years ago, there existed an agriculture-based civilization in Israel. Okay, now very few people know about it. But coming back to India, if you look at agriculture, there is a evidence of harvesting, storage, cooking of grains going back to 43,000 BC, 45,000 years ago. This research exists in a peer-reviewed papers, those people who are stuck in the peer-reviewed nonsense. If you come further, closer towards us, a well-established agricultural practices, again, the agriculture plantations, the style of plantation, but also storage, cooking, and all that kind of thing, we get a very good evidence, again published in peer-reviewed journals, going back to 16,000 BCE, that is going back 18,000 years. So if you start looking in that context, the 5,000 BCE of Mahabharata should not surprise you. If you're surprised, that is your ignorance. The 12,000 BCE Ramayana should not surprise you. Again, if it surprises you, it's your ignorance. What about archaeology? If you come to the Gujarat coast, okay, and I'm not talking of Krishna's Dwarka, we did that. Krishna's Dwarka only 7,500 years ago, 5525 BC is when it got flooded. But archaeology evidence of a human habitation, human civilization on the west coast of India goes back to 30,000 years. Okay, this is archaeology evidence. So I started there because unless you have it, people are just stuck thinking, how come anything is possible in 5,000 BC when there were no human beings, there was no earth, there was no language. These are the colonial impressions that have been taught. They were taught for a certain reason because of the dogma they were holding at that time. Now they have given it in no, I don't think anyone in Great Britain or United Kingdoms right now thinks that Earth began in 4004 BC. The problem is when they are not believing it anymore, if they are not, even these Western powers are also not removing not helping remove this nonsense of Aryan invasion. In fact, they are emphasizing, yeah, that's what happened to you guys. That is something that was created as a dogma to slave people is still being used to maintain them in a slavery. Something else I want to mention, just from a ground, not just the ocean, near ocean. At the top, what picture do you see? You see like something being, a hole being drilled in the teeth, right? There is a paper and there is a evidence of dental surgery taking place 7,000 years ago or 9,000 years ago. And of course, anywhere that happens in the world, we should celebrate it because that's a leap of humanity, progress of humanity. Guess what? Guess where the location is? It's in India. It's in the Sindhu Saraswati area that you have evidence of dental surgery taking place 5,000, 7,000, 9,000 years ago, before Mahabharata. And at the bottom, the picture that you see is from Mehergarh. It is from, again, Sindhu Saraswati civilization. Now it is, physical location is in Baluchistan, okay, which is also occupied by Pakistan, by the way. So what you see there is that these are granaries, or these are the places where people stored grains and also where they lived. So significant archaeology evidence, no surprise. Climatology, that goes with the monsoon intensification, but also rivers, because river and water is very much required for transportation, but just the basic sustenance to grow the crops, grow the fruits, grow the vegetables, just to sustain, like, to drink, to take shower and whatnot. And when it comes to Mahabharata, it's very important. Where I show you the star, that's when Mahabharata took place based on the claim made by Dr. P.V. Vartak. So we are going back 30,000 years, and what my brain is going through. Now, why is this important? Because Saraswati, the grand river described in the Rigveda, existed before, but when is that before? The Indians simply said long time ago, okay, but they didn't have an exact chronology to state. There was, but it was called the yugas. And, just to explain that long, any big number was still considered okay. And that created some more confusion. But when the modern scientific methods came into being, and when they started studying the area of a Saraswati, what they found, and now we know that the Saraswati was definitely flowing for easily 200,000 years. 200,000 years. Don't forget this. It's a peer-reviewed paper. For example, the recent paper is from, I think, James Blinkhorn, showing that the Saraswati near Bikaner, now it's all desert, guys. No water to be seen other than the stored water they do through the lakes and whatnot. Going back to 172,000 years, okay? Now, what is the significance of that? Why am I showing you this? Because that huge river became smaller. Now, huge meaning how huge was it? Like 22 kilometers wide. Just imagine, which river have you seen that's 22 kilometers wide? Actually, go into the Google Maps and try to find one. I mean, go check Mississippi, go check Amazon, and so on, and you'll be surprised. In certain places, 16 to 22 kilometer wide. Okay, that was that river. But now in our times, it's not to be seen. And if you come to Ramayana, you just see one brief description. And if you come further down to our times to Ramayana, Mahabharata, suddenly there are many descriptions, so 100 plus descriptions of Saraswati in the Mahabharata text. And people are saying, come on, this Saraswati, that grand Saraswati of the Rigveda is gone long time ago. How come it is there in 7,500 years ago? Now, by the way, realize when they say Saraswati was gone long time ago, they indirectly, without realizing, acknowledge the deep antiquity of Indian civilization, deep antiquity of Rigveda. Why is that? Because Rigveda describes Saraswati as Gribhya Samudra. That biggest river, Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati, the grandest of the grand river, the grandest of the grand goddess, okay? That river, which started in high mountains, Gribhya, and flew, and basically flew all the way to the ocean, Samudra, up to the ocean. Like that, Samudra even also comes in the Spanish, if you know, is like in the two, two, like that, from mountains to ocean. From Sanskrit, that again through the Latin, as you know, Romance languages. You can see, in fact, when I learned Spanish, when I go to the South America, my Spanish is extremely broken. But the point is, I try to remember the words, or when I really struggle, I try to think of my mother tongue Marathi, which is very close to Sanskrit or Sanskrit. And I said, let me try this word. Maybe there is something closer to that will work. And actually 30, 40, 50% of the time it works. Many of the words in Spanish I remember by remembering how that word is said in my language, mother tongue Marathi or Sanskrit. So what I wanted to say here is that the evidence that you are seeing, climatology evidence, coming from many different sources. It's coming from the ocean, it's coming from the lakes on the land, and from the pure land itself. And what it shows is that this gives you the secret or the explanation why there are 100 plus different descriptions of river Saraswati in Mahabharata. When I say different, what I'm saying is, in some places it is flowing beautifully, in other places it has disappeared under the sand, still other places it is coming out of the sand, and some other places it is flowing under the sand. Okay, so it's like Saraswati, you can see in all its phases during the Mahabharata time. Now remember, it has become very, very small, relatively small, compared to its 16 and 22 miles down to 7 or 5 miles wide, still big river in the Ramayana times, and maybe still further shrunk by the time of Mahabharata. But something else happened. What is that something else? The monsoon, the seasonal rain that goes for 2 to 3, 4 months in India. This is called southwest monsoon, Nairutya monsoon. Okay, and that monsoon basically got intensified. It was always there, but it got intensified during this time from 9,000 to 7,000 years ago, which is what, 7,000 to 4,500 BC. And that's exactly where the date that Vartak came up with. Now, Vartak has not done this research. By the way, Vartak had no access to some of the research that I am showing you, that I showed just before, but also showing you right now. He had no access to this research. That is the greatness of Vartak. But from the internal evidence of Mahabharata, along with the Purana evidence and whatever he could have his hands on, he had come to that 5561 BC. What I'm showing you is, when I came across his research, I started reading it and I said, well, 5561 BC, my God, I mean, can I believe this? Well, let me see if I can find evidence that supports this. And that's when I started looking for evidence like whatever I just showed you before, but then the climatology. And that's what I found. This is actually paper from 2016, Anindya Sarkar, okay, on the climatology. What it's showing is that there is a sufficient evidence coming from different sources, very reliable, very factual, very precise evidence for the intensification of monsoon beginning with 7,000 BCE, going up to 4,500 BCE. And that explains the multiple different facets of Saraswati that are described in Mahabharata. That actually doesn't happen even in the Ramayana. It happens in Rigveda, but for Rigveda, we have to go beyond 22,000 BC. Ramayana is, we are talking 14,000 years ago. Mahabharata, we are talking 7,500 years ago. I'll cover a couple more points and we can stop for today. Oceanography, I can go fast through this because I have done a separate session on flooding and destruction of Dwarka. So now, remember, think of it this way. Most of you have heard about this Arundhati Vasishtha and a big deal. And at some point we are going to go it. In fact, I'm in no hurry whatsoever to discuss Arundhati Vasishtha because it is such a fascinating evidence that once you understand it, and in the meantime, you should go to the books, go to the blogs, go watch the videos, and try to immerse yourself as much as you can into this Arundhati Vasishtha. But even in real life, what was happening is, I know early 90s, I came to know of Dr. P.V. Vartak's work, 5561 BCE. It was not until 2009 until I figured out why astronomically Arundhati had gone ahead of Vasishtha and why it could be seen walking ahead of Vasishtha. But in the meantime, see, just because you have not solved a certain problem doesn't mean you just don't do anything. You can work on other aspects and see, can you find a corroborative evidence? So I'm just showing you some examples of that, just like I showed climatology. Here, it's oceanography. Again, I have discussed this before, but now think of from a different perspective. I'm not coming from Arundhati Vasishtha because when I start with Arundhati Vasishtha, then Bhishma Nirvan, and then explain you how planetary evidence all fits, I am doing Pararth Hanuman because that is a efficient, easy way to explain the greatness of 5561 BC as the year of Mahabharata war. It's a Pararth Hanuman, but that's not how exactly I figured it out. So as a historical story or how the research is done or how the researchers are made, I'm sharing this in a slightly different format. So let's imagine I'm taking the date of Dr. Vartak, 5561 BC. Now, Mahabharata text says that after the Mahabharata war, after 36 years, the Dwarka was flooded and destroyed by the gushing waters of the sea entering Dwarka. Okay, so we'll take this and then we will stop and then we will do another one next time, Adityaji. So I take 5561 BC, I add 36, I get 5525 BC. That's the flooding and destruction of Dwarka. Possibly it was like an island on the western coast of India, or if not island, right on the coast. Okay, so now the question is there oceanography evidence for that particular date? And what's going to be my background knowledge? Naturally, the oceanography data. Now here we have to remember that if you are on an island, a particular location is on the island or island itself or on the ocean, on the shore, you will always find numerous instances of a flooding, tsunami, and whatnot as you go back in antiquity. That's just given. I mean, the evidence may exist, evidence may not exist, but if it exists, you'll still find multiple instances. The question is, how do we connect with 5525 BC? What is funny, and that's where the Dr. Vartak stands out from all other researchers, is this. Do you know what many researchers do? They will just, because they cannot take the evidence of Mahabharata text and cannot match for their dates, they will just give up this effort in halfway and now say, just scratch their head and say, okay, what else I can do to basically, honestly, I'm saying is not to put people down, but just to tell the truth, to create another fakery because they cannot do this one. They will go and look for, say, instances of floods. And what happens once you decide a location, you are going to find events, multiple events, potential events, plausible events for flood, tsunami, and so on. And they say, oh, look, here I found something. Maybe Mahabharata war happened here. Maybe is a correct language. They said that's why Mahabharata war happened here. And it is illogical and it is unscientific. So is there evidence? Is there oceanography evidence? And when I started looking for it, I found everywhere. And I mean, I have 100, 150, 200 paper on this. Okay, they come, every paper is not like so crystal clear that it is talking about this particular flooding. No. So I'm going to share a few, but even 4 specific examples. And then there is a more on the east coast of Maine, not far from here. If you just follow Highway 95, east coast of Maine, you can see the evidence. It may not be very obvious to you unless you read some of the research papers. That sudden sea level rise or land sinking or land getting encroached by the sea in the 6th millennium BC If you go to Australia, you will find that too. But again, even they remember little bit of a distant references in the sense of a clarity and precision and whatnot. But the four blue stars that I'm showing are very, very precise. I'll go quickly fast through it because we have done this before. So going to the Caribbean, like Bahamas, okay, Barbados and whatnot. This is the person, Paul Blanchard, Ryan Smith. They were doing geology research when I was doing my master's in chemical engineering in Canada, University of Alberta. And this is what they found. Because until, and this was revolutionary by itself. Forget about Mahabharata for a minute. Because many of the geologists even realized, just like I told you about the beginning of Earth, like people were believing it started 4004 BC. Even in the geology, it was a revolution. So first, Wegener, who created the theory, proposed the theory of plate tectonics. In his lifetime, he'd never got the credit. People just abused him. Okay, all kinds of abuse he had to accept from the academic community, from the so-called scholarly community, research community. Only when he has gone, or eventually people came to accept his plate tectonic theory. Similarly, what people were believing, that finally they accepted, it took a long time, that the ocean levels are changing and whatnot. The ocean levels were also rising for last 20,000 years plus. And they believed that it was rising smoothly. That's why also they were not willing to accept plate tectonic. Or now there is another theory called earth crust displacement. When I say another theory now, I'm talking of going back to the same time as Wegener. Wegener proposed it in 1928, the plate tectonic, and it experienced fierce resistance. People were not willing to accept because they couldn't accept this happening. Same thing is happening for last 70, 80 years to earth crust displacement. Same thing was happening here. So in that way also, what Paul Blanchard and Ryan Smith did is extremely pioneering at University of Alberta. So people know that after the last glacial maximum, the ocean levels are rising smoothly. But that's what the only thing they were willing to accept. And what Blanchard and many other researchers after that, and even slightly before, showed that yes, it was smoothly rising, but there were some specific instances they were not smooth rising of waters, and they termed those CRE, catastrophic rise event, and they call this, for this 20,000 year period, 1, 2, and 3. That event number 3 is perfectly matches with what is happening in Dwarka in India 7,500 years ago. That's 7.6. Think of that as a 7,600 years ago, 5,600 BC, approximately, plus minus 130 years. Suddenly water level rose in the Barbados, but 7 other locations it has been verified. 6.5 meters. Now that's like a 20 plus minus 2.5. So like up to 20 feet suddenly. Okay. And that actually the data that is collected from this Palmetto accretion, that is based on that data, it has been inferred that that's what exactly happened and how much was the increase and so on. It perfectly matches with the Mahabharata description and Mahabharata dating for flooding and destruction of Dwarka in 5525 BC. So wherever I'm putting the star, that is the timing of Mahabharata war. Now, 2 geologists from Columbia University in New York, Ryan and Pittman, what they showed is that the transformation of a Black Sea from a sweetwater, sea into a salty sea happened essentially suddenly, okay, practically instantaneous on a geographical scale. And where did that happen? That happened at that 7,500 years ago, or precisely 5550 BC, plus minus 30, 40 years. Very small, narrow bracket, very precise data. And they did this based on 9 different parameters. Again, perfectly matches with flooding and destruction of Dwarka in 5525 BC. On the west coast, you see the same thing of India, a sudden increase of 15 meters, 1.5. So that's like a 45 feet increase in the sea level. Now remember, it's relative to the land. So the land might also go up and down. So the effective might be a different number, even more exaggerated, more accelerated, or less is possible. But there was a significant event in the middle of 6th millennium, that's 5525 BC, and that's how the Dwarka got flooded. Okay, and I have discussed this, so I'll go fast through that. So you see where Mahabharata war is happening. And then the evidence that you see for water going actually overboard, meaning going above today's sea levels, 3 meters, staying there for 2,000 years. That explains many things about the Indian civilization of last 5,000, 7,000 years, such as Dholavira or Lothal becoming a port, and why they again stopped being a port, and so on, okay, based on the water levels. Then this is the location of Dwarka. And actually, Aditya, I'll just do this. We are at the hour, and I'll stop for today. So this is how Dwarka is imagined by the artist, so I'll take you back through that. This is the Dwarka at night. This is the Dwarka through the different times of the month. This painting is done by Alam Zaiji, from United Kingdom. By taking painting from somebody else, like one Mr. Nayak, his original painting, and he modified it. This painting, more than likely from Hare Krishna, if I remember correctly, and Aditya ji, you can confirm, or if you happen to know. Just a visualization of artist, how Dwarka was. What it tells you from the descriptions also, from the Mahabharata and other Puranas, that Dwarka had bridges, multiple bridges to access the place, which means it was very close. It was more like Amsterdam, you can say, like, lots of places, lots of water going through the city kind of thing. Or it was like an island very close to the land, and that way it was naturally protected, so to say, but also the bridges. Okay, just I'll show you this evidence and we'll stop. Now, this is something globally, this picture should be familiar to you. On left side, what you're seeing is Graham Hancock. He has done research worldwide. Okay, he has received a lot of praise, and of course, with praise comes the lot of criticism. So just like I have my share of it, he has his share of criticism. And what he does is he poses this as a proposal, shows the evidence, and he wants people to think. I want to do the exactly same thing. That's what I do. Anyways, around the world, as he has explored, right now he's doing in America, he has done, there is any small place, possibly that he has not covered. He has been everywhere. And so he has also explored India. And what you see on the right is Professor Glenn Milne. I don't know if we get any people joining from Canada, but he's at University of Ottawa. He's a geologist. He did his PhD in Toronto. He's originally from Scotland. He was teaching in Durham University in UK, and now at University of Ottawa. Together, and you can see the documentary also, but the quickly point I want to bring it is, when they studied the bathymetric data on the coasts of India, they have done research on both sides, but we'll focus on Dwarka for now. On the west side, this is Gujarat area. You see this island. Now, this is just after the Ramayana times, 13,500 BP. Okay, so that's like 11,500. Ramayana happened 12,209. So it's 1,000 years after you see this map. So that land is there. What it also shows you, and Aditya ji, you would love it here, that if you go back to the Ramayana times, and there is no reason to think of any other time but that 14,000 years ago, because Valmiki Ramayana, the Valmiki's evidence tells us so. We cannot go anywhere else. It is connected. The Sri Lanka is connected with the land. There is no question of a Nala Setu. There is no need to build a Setu if Sri Lanka was the Lanka of Ravana. Now, Sri Lanka could be part of Ravana's Lanka kingdom. That is possible. And Aditya ji and myself have discussed that. But the point I'm really saying is, because, people's logic works in a very crazy way. It works in an illogical way. Do you know what they say? Since 14,000 years ago, the land of Sri Lanka was connected to India, and therefore no need of a Nala bridge, Nala Setu. Therefore, Ramayana could not have happened 14,000 years ago because they want the bridge there. The problem with that is Valmiki Ramayana evidence in no way will ever take you to Sri Lanka or any time when there was finally water. It just will not happen. But back to Dwarka. So as we proceed in time, you see how that island is a little bit shrinking. Now we come to 10,600 BP. BP is before present. So if you want to know approximate date for BC, then you have to subtract 2,000 years. So this 10,600 BP is 8,600 BC approximately. Look at what that happening to the island. Then 8,900 BC, and now bingo. Between 7,700 BC, which is what? 5,000. So you have to remove 2,000, right? So 5,700 BC to 6,900 BP, which is what? 4,900 BP BCE. Between those two, that particular island that you see here, and I am asserting that this is Dwarka. Now remember, this is just the bathymetric data. So actually when it would have existed, the water may not be that much, but if it is, so what? We have seen the Oakland Bridge there, right? But my point is, the water may not be that much, and the land may be, the area may be very small here in between. In any ways, that particular island simply disappeared between 5700 and 4900 BC. Now recall our date of Dwarka flooding, 5525 BC. It falls right there. Because we have gone over time, Aditya, I want to stop today. Next time, maybe we'll continue this tradition. But I want to show how this is how actually research is done, even when you may start with a problem and you may not be able to solve it. You can still go on the periphery, can collect a lot of evidence and actually learn a lot. So even before I demystified Arundhati Vasishtha, in a way, I was convinced that this is the date of the Mahabharat war. In my subjective mind, I cannot necessarily show with a very clear evidence until I had done the Bhishma Nirvan and Arundhati Vasishtha. But that is based on this. Every evidence was taking me to that particular date of Dr. Vartak.
No, there was a documentary by some popular TV channel, and they were trying to go from Rameshwaram to Simhaladweep.
Okay.
And which is Ceylon. And Sri Lanka is a new name, not the old name. It's a brand new name.
1972.
Name did not exist.
1972. That's when they started calling it Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. That name did not exist. So now in the documentary, there are many parts between the two countries that you can actually walk in the ocean.
You mean along that
area?
No, yeah, formation, yeah.
So the land is so up. It is not a bridge right now. It is. It was. You can walk through it. And the TV crew was regularly jumping in the water from the lake. And I'll send you the link actually.
I would appreciate that. Yes, yeah.
And then the water was just knee deep, not more than that. And both sides is the ocean. So that also shows it was a land. And bridge may have been created for some sections.
For Simhaladweep to India connection, right?
Connection, because the bridge can be done, and floating rocks is a very common phenomena across the world. It's not just India; it's in Malaysia, Mauritius, many places are available.
Interesting.
But the bridge of Ramayana, which is mentioned, is very vast, like 800 miles by 80 miles, 10 yojana by 800 yojana. That's the size of the bridge. And they such a big army, like many things are there, and I think we'll cover in the next show.
Sure.
What a fascinating research you presented, and also the respect to the previous author Vartak ji is also very much respected, because I have read his book and it's a remarkable book. I can read Marathi, but I cannot speak it. That's a bit different.
Right, yeah. And so think of it. Forget Bharat. I mean, he's a Bharat Ratna worthy individual.
Correct.
But he's not even recognized with the Padma Shri or Padma Bhushan or Padma Vibhushan. That just tells you sometime, like being in the right place, right time kind of things does certain things, being in the right circles, and other people will just get sidelined. The one who do original research.
No, in the case, and with due respect to all the genuine people who are getting it, I have to put that caveat there. But But the most of the time, these awards have lost their relevance because they are given more for the political connections and your reach and external show of sophistication, which is not the criteria of a Shastric person.
Correct.
Vyasdev was not the most handsomest people in the planet. It is widely recognized.
Right.
In fact, the women were scared of him when we saw the Ambalika.
Correct. And so last 4 or 5 years, the current government, Indian government has tried to right the wrongs in many ways. Nobody is perfect. But when I'm talking about like people getting Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan, some of the names, we can take those, like in journalism, it just shows how far down we went by giving these awards to anyone, almost like anti-India guys, anti-India haters.
Yeah, there should be very strict quality standards, and the work has to be seen, and the worth of the work has to be seen, and also by the people who understand it.
Correct.
I judging people on clothes is as good as somebody judging an apple by the standard of oranges.
There you go. We should know our expertise, where our expertise stops, right?
Yes.
And by the way, when I'm putting some words of a critic about the Indian Padma Awards, Indian Civic Awards. That's not limited to India. Like you look at what has happened in the Nobel Prize, the intention may be right, and many people, many deserving people have received it. At the same time, people who should have never gone anywhere close to it have also received Nobel Prize.
Well,
So I mean,
Nobel
that is
Prize, I
happening
can
around
speak.
the world.
Yeah, Nobel Peace Prize, I can say a lot of things about it. A terrorist got a Nobel Peace Prize. And we all know that how that Yasser Arafat got it. And he was also given Bharat Ratna also. I don't know, Bharat Ratna or the highest guarantee, I don't know what is the award for them.
Yeah.
And then also so Nobel Peace Prize is a political prize to spread
Yeah.
Abrahamic faith, which is very clear.
Nobel Economics Prize is also like that. It's not even a political. It's like a total jugaad.
Total jugaad.
Hmm.
And even Obama commented, I have not done anything to deserve it. Obama said it.
Correct. And he was at least rightful about, I mean, he was truthful about it. I will tell you a quick small instance. When I was doing my executive MBA, I wrote about some person's like paper, as a case study we had to read. I didn't know who that person was. I actually was traveling, and so I flew from here to West Coast to your place, like Ontario, California. Went to the hotel room, and we have to write about it. So I wrote something, and on the plane, I had read the paper, and I said either this guy is like a novice or really idiotic. I mean, that's what I felt. What was written. It's not about the guy, but what was written. So that's what I wrote. And I won't mention the name, not that it's a secret, but when actually the course started, finally we went in the classroom, and I figured out that that person was a Nobel Prize in economics. Now, the person he's not a bad person, but the person may say that, and person may say, well, Nilesh, you must be wrong. Yeah, I could be wrong. That's fine. What was very interesting, you would love this. At the end of that particular course, when we discussed that paper, the person who was, by the way, ready to become the Fed's chair. He was one of the contenders for the Fed's chair place, right from Emory here. At Emory University from Atlanta. Do you know what he said? He said, so people were wondering now that Nilesh will be grilled, Nilesh will be roasted because he wrote like what a thing. He said, yeah, so Nilesh is right. So my criticism, he completely accepted of that particular paper. So that's just an anecdote. But my point is the economics is also another jugaad, basically to manufacture, manipulate whatever they need to do, because common man doesn't recognize it, and common man takes this as like a gospel, like, oh, the person must have done something great. And India has its the Indians who have received in economics is basically are given for their anti-India activities. Okay, that is how it has worked out, the Nobel Prize in economics. Yeah, we can stop, Aditya ji, here.
Yes. Thank you so much for everyone to join and live audience. And I really have to respect that. Do go to the YouTube, like, subscribe, and also watch because you won't remember everything. There's a lot of data covered here. And also, I love this presentation myself because I always like to thank my teachers and also people who inspire me. That's a genuine way of being a scholar. Not that, like Bhagavad Gita says, just steal everybody's work and then claim yours. That's not the right way. It's always good to acknowledge, the Prakriti Kriya Manani, and we will just acknowledge it. Thank you so much, Nilesh ji, as usual. A wonderful
Thank
show.
you. Thank
And
you.
Namaskar, everyone. Thank you.
Namaskar.